Today on the Rise of the Challenge podcast.
It was fairly normal in college in that, you could drink beer every night. You can go and party and you can do all these things. And so it was all about drinking beer and chasing girls. And then when I graduated college and the rest of my friends matriculated to regular life and got jobs and careers and families, I moved to Baltimore, Maryland, and within a couple of years, I was addicted pretty heavily to heroin and crack.
Welcome to the Rise of the Challenge podcast. Joining you today, he's the CEO of the Mile High Recovery Center. It's Brice Hancock. How are you doing today, Brice?
Good, Alex. Thanks for having me.
We're so excited to have you on the show to talk about your rise to the challenge. What we like to do with all of our guests is go right to the beginning. Talk about where you're from and what you like doing growing up.
Okay, so I am from Maryland, from Washington, D.C., Baltimore area, but I actually grew up on a horse farm. Um, it wasn't really a working horse farm, so it was basically a middle class family. And my mother liked horses. And so I grew up in a very small town called Barnesville, Barnesville, Maryland. And we moved around a lot. So in what was it, junior high, we moved out to California, and so I'm a person in long-term recovery, which means that I've been clean and sober for a significant amount of time. I started smoking pot, I'd say seventh, eighth grade,
Wow.
and got caught in California. And we were moving back to Maryland at that point, and my parents said, "We're going to put this kid in Catholic school." So ninth grade, I'm in Catholic school. And the thing about Catholic school is that some of those kids are far more corrupt than the public school kids because a lot of them got kicked out and sent to Catholic school. And so I always gravitated towards the wrong crowd. So, uh, but I did pretty well, honor roll student, played sports all through high school. And then the second that I graduated high school and went to college, I became a daily blackout drunk. It was fairly normal in college in that, you could drink beer every night. You can go and party and you can do all these things. And so it was all about drinking beer and chasing girls. And then when I graduated college and the rest of my friends matriculated to regular life and got jobs and careers and families, I moved to Baltimore, Maryland, and within a couple of years, I was addicted pretty heavily to heroin and crack. And yeah, so I went off the deep end. So the thing about doing hard drugs like that in a city like that is that it gets real weird real fast. And I basically crashed and burned in Baltimore. I played music, which was a great time playing music with my friends in the 90s, back when grunge was popular and there was all these great bands out there, and I was kind of part of it. And then I crashed and burned and I moved to Colorado. I followed my parents out to Colorado. Um, Continued to play music, and I was kind of sort of always able to dial back my drug addiction and just drink because it's hard to smoke crack and play music. And so for the most part, it was, I was a cocaine addict, but it was cocaine, opioids, mostly pain pills, and lots of drinking. And so I was doing a lot of touring with my band and recording with my band, and I was booking my band, and apparently I was pretty good at it. So I started booking other bands. Then I started being a promoter on larger shows, and then I got a job booking national blues tours. And then I started to supplement my income by booking clubs. I'd be the exclusive booking agent for clubs. And so I was booking a club, and then I'd go to another club that was bigger, and then I would do that. And then at one point, one of the guys that owned the clubs, a friend of mine, said, "Do you want to buy this bar?" And I said, "Sure. But I don't have any money. I can't buy a bar." And he said, "I'll carry the loan for you," which basically means I fall ass backwards for no money down. I own a bar. This was when I was about my late 30s, 40 years old. Horrible alcoholic. Um, and now I own a bar. And I didn't think it could get any worse. And it did. It got much worse. I owned the bar for 8 years, and I was having all kinds of health problems. I was drinking about a half gallon of vodka a day. I was waking up and drinking. I would drink vodka before I could drink water. throwing up all over the place. I was passing blood. I was very dehydrated. I had these sores all over my body. I was completely bloated, and I was having all these mental health problems. And so I was in out of the doctor with all these physical problems. And so he eventually did a blood test on me. And I remember I came back to the doctor's office and he showed me the test. He shared the results of the test with me. He said, "You're a late stage alcoholic. I give you a year to live if you can't stop drinking." He said, "Your liver is cirrhotic, your pancreas is stressed, and I'm surprised that your heart hasn't stopped." And I could not stop drinking. I drank for well over a year. And every day I knew I was dying, but it was like, I'm not going to die today. I'm just going to continue to drinking and get drunk today, like I've been doing for the last 25 years. And so it just got worse and worse and worse. And then one day I went to an AA meeting and didn't stop yet. I probably went to 20 AA meetings, and then one day I went to one and I just stopped. I was able to put together about 90 days of sobriety. And that's when I realized what it really meant to be an alcoholic, because I've heard the expression, and I like this expression, is that I didn't suffer from my alcoholism until I stopped drinking. And then I had a series of relapses because I didn't do any of the work that you're supposed to do in order to stay sober. And I ended up having like this mental breakdown, and I ended up in a psych ward. And so in the psych ward, I had this like epiphany. I had been diagnosed bipolar, and so I did this thing where I would use the bipolar symptoms in order to get medication to just anything to keep from being sober, and anything to admit that I was an alcoholic. And so I played my cards right. They said, "You are bipolar 1 with rapid cycling and post-traumatic stress disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder from early childhood trauma." And I remember thinking, that's fantastic, because that means I don't have to stop drinking. I'm mentally ill, right? And so they put me on all this medication, which was awful. It felt horrible. I was very disoriented, and so I had a choice to make. Do I want to be a mental patient or just admit that I'm powerless over drugs and alcohol? And so I got out of there and I immediately went back to AA, did the work, did the steps the way you're supposed to do it, worked the program, went to outpatient treatment for 2 years, which is excessive. But I was afraid to drink again. So I stayed sober. So that's I guess the nickel version of how I became a horrible addict, alcoholic, and then got sober.
Going through, you mentioned at the very beginning that
Yeah,
you always got a group, the wrong crowd.
yeah.
Is there a specific moment that you felt like that was kind of when you realized that was the wrong crowd? Or was it later on when you reflect over it, you're like, that was the starting point?
I really think it was this. I think it was trauma. I think so. I don't like saying that my house was abusive,
Mhm.
but clinically, it would probably be diagnosed as emotionally abusive. I grew up in an emotionally abusive household, which really just means that my mother grew up in an alcoholic home, and so she's not an alcoholic, but there was all these traits and patterns that were brought over, and so it was not healthy for me emotionally. And so I had all this fear. I had all these abandonment issues, and I had this terrible fear of rejection and low self-esteem. And so I was scared, and I was always playing small, and I was scared to put myself forward. And the best way to fit in was to start abusing substances, and they accepted me. That crowd accepted me right away, and I thought I'd found my people. So that's how I was always getting in trouble, but at the same time as I was always on the honor roll, right? So it was kind of like this world where I wasn't doing well, but I knew that if I did just well enough, it would keep everybody off my back.
You mentioned that with like, because you look at statistics or people that you see the comparison if they get into the substances, usually sometimes work or education doesn't go upwards. But you
Mhm.
kind of mentioned where you kind of were doing so well at school that it kind of brought this down where they're not going to notice anything because if you're doing well in school, they're going to think, oh, everything's fine. Did anyone like teachers or maybe friend groups that weren't a part of that crowd notice any changes? Did they maybe see anything different as you gotten older? Or was it the group that you were with? They were part of the group, so they knew exactly what was going on.
It's interesting. Somehow I was always able to convince my parents that it was all the other, it was all the other kids that were into these things, and it wasn't me. Even when I'd get arrested at a young age, I would somehow convince my parents that it was them,
Mhm.
mom, dad, it was them. And like I said, they caught me with weed. They put me in Catholic school, and we moved around a lot. So I was kind of able to, I don't know, just float under the radar. I mean, my kids are screwed now because I'm hip to the red flags, right?
Yeah. I mean, that might be a good thing that
It
you
is.
learned from your journey that you've been on so that it's almost like you're protecting them. You don't want to see them go down a similar path that you're out there watching to make sure they don't go down that same path.
I definitely don't. I mean, the truth is, I shouldn't be alive. My son's story is supposed to be my dad died when I was 2 years old. You know, he owned a bar and he knew all these crazy people and he couldn't stop drinking. So I definitely hope to save them from that kind of a life.
As you're growing up, sometimes we have that dream question. What is that dream job? You
Mm,
look at you were really into the music side once you got
mm.
out of college. But what was that dream job? If everything went the path that you wanted, what would you have wanted to do?
Rock star. That was it. That's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a rock star.
Is there a specific like solo bands
I
preferred?
don't, no, I mean, I like when I was in high school, I liked heavy metal, and then as soon as I hit college, I heard Jane's Addiction and the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and I was just lit up. You know, in 1991, Nirvana came out, and I was just like, "This is it! Like, I want to be part of this scene." You know.
With all the jobs that you had, what skills did it really showcase for you? You
Mm-hmm.
talked about like the different areas you went through with the booking agent and you kind of kept growing. Did you notice a side of skills that you're like, wow, I didn't know I had this in me?
Yeah, marketing. I'm pretty good at marketing. I'm definitely like an entrepreneur at heart. I always hated working for other people. And I think when you grow up feeling rejected, you learn to solve, you learn to believe that you have to do everything on your own. So I'm very self-sufficient, which can be a detriment, but it can also be, of tremendous value, especially if you are an entrepreneur. You have to grow a business on your own.
With taking those skills, with the addiction, did your family ever realize what was happening? When did it come to a time where they finally knew the truth in what was happening?
Yeah. Again, I was always able to somehow just float under the radar. Like I got caught in high school several times drinking. I had several DUIs. I got kicked out of college and they told me that if you don't get an A and a B in these two history courses over the summer, you can't come back. And so what did I do? I went and I got an A and a B in the summer courses and went back to college. I remember driving around in awful neighborhoods in Baltimore, Maryland, looking for drugs. And my worst fear was that my mother would find out, not that I would go to jail. Um, so I was always able to fool them until I wasn't. And so when I owned the bar, it became painfully obvious to everybody that Brice has a drinking problem. And they confronted me several times. And but it's difficult when your adult child doesn't want help. There's really not much you can do. And at one point, my mother even went to a couple AA meetings to just to suss it out and see what it would be like for me. So they didn't really. There was no serious confrontations until I was probably in my late 30s.
Well, you mentioned a lot of people listening, if they are going through a struggle, it's hard for that individual to say they need help until they finally realize that they need help. And a lot of times you see the outside parties trying to make them think that they need help. And you just see it's combating with each
It is.
other.
Yeah,
And someone from like if you're not going through that experience that that person's going through, wouldn't be able to understand why they're saying no all the time, or
mm.
I don't need help. What would you say to someone that maybe is listening to this? They're going through a challenge internally. They might have had similar story with their floating. No one really knows. But when the timing is right, how can they reach out to people and share?
You mean the person that needs help, or the
The
people that are
person that
trying
needs
to?
help, because you're kind
Yeah.
of coming from that point of view where I can't come from that side and
Mm.
say I needed help because I've never gone through something.
Sure. So I was, like I said, I was passing blood. I was waking up and throwing up every day. I was completely physically dependent on alcohol. And if somebody confronted me, I would fight them.
Yeah.
I was fighting to stay that way. And kind of like the way I look at it now is that one of the symptoms of the disease of addiction is denial.
Mhm.
That's how it continues to keep a hold of you, and that's a really good working definition of addiction, is that it hijacks your brain. It makes you think that you need it, and it disguises itself. So I would tell myself this story that I can handle it, or why should I deprive myself of something I enjoy? And so when you're in it, I think it's important. This is what I think, is that when you need help and you won't admit that you need help, your loved ones have to wait. They have to wait for the right opportunity to step in and go, this is what the help looks like. Here's the help. We love you. And this is what we want you to do. And then they need to be ready to pull back if that person is not willing to accept the help. But if you're like an alcoholic or an addict like I was, eventually you're going to get arrested. There's going to be a DUI, there's going to be an overdose, I'm going to ruin Thanksgiving, and there's going to be a moment where they can step in and say, we're here to help you.
You mentioned about your son would have been had writing a story about my dad died when I was 2. What's the biggest thing that you're hoping if he listens to this in the future that he learns about you and what you've gone through to where you are today? The impact and the story that you've shared.
I don't know. In a very real way, his presence in my life saved me. When I first got sober, he was 1.5. And I was married, and I owned a bar. So that job had to go. And the person I was married to was having her own struggles with alcohol. And so she had to go. And so, holy crap, I find myself in a situation where I need to raise a 2-year-old boy, and I had no idea how to do that. And so I was living in this house in the mountains here in Colorado with him, and I didn't know what to do, but it was easy because when he was hungry, I would feed him. When he was bored, I would entertain him. When he went to the bathroom, I would change him. And so I went from being very self-centered to very other-centered, right?
Mhm.
And I needed that. I needed that purpose, and I needed to be needed. Like he needed me. Do you know what I mean? Like it was a very real love, and it was kind of, people talk about it all the time when they have a baby, or their child is born. Like it's not that they love it more than anything in the world. It's that they didn't know that kind of love existed until that child was born. And so he saved me. You know what I mean? Like I'm not saying I got sober for him. Sorry if he hears that, but it definitely helped keep me sober. And I needed that, especially that first year of sobriety, because it was so scary.
Going through sobriety, How often do you feel that relapses were triggers for you? Being around, going to a party or events or out to eat, and you see those triggers. What did you do to kind of hold yourself back to not give in to those temptations?
So the first, so like I said, when I first went into 12-step meetings, I didn't do any work. And the program is designed a very specific way. There's work that you do. It's a spiritual program of action. And so when I finally got to a point where I didn't trust my own thinking, I was willing to accept the help, the way the help looked instead of the way I wanted it to look. Um, and I did the work and I got a sponsor and I went, like I said, I went to outpatient treatment for 2 years. I dove into it like like a dog with a snake in its mouth, right? Like I was willing to do anything and I did everything I was told to do. And fortunately, I didn't have my job anymore. I didn't have that marriage anymore. So there was some very big temptation removed out of my life. And so I just struggled. I sat on my hands. I went to a lot of meetings, which sounds miserable, but the truth is it was a step up for me because I was staying sober. I was working, you know, I was doing what normal people call life. And around 5 or 6 months of doing this work and just I don't know, staying in the pain and just moving through it, the desire to drink went away. I woke up one day and I realized it had been a couple weeks since I thought about drinking. And prior to that, I couldn't remember a day. I couldn't remember an hour where I wasn't drinking, recovering from drinking, thinking about drinking, or thinking about not drinking. And when I woke up and I had this aha moment, like I haven't thought about drinking for a couple weeks, and it gave me, like when you do something and it's hard and you start to see results and you start to get like addicted to like more results. And so it gave me strength and it gave me hope. And that's really the best thing that I needed was hope. So the better I got, the more better I got, the more well I got, the more sober I got, like the more strength I got to continue on that path. And so when I wouldn't go to bars. I just didn't do it. I didn't put myself in those situations. I was too scared. I believed that if I drank again, I was going to die.
It goes with the rise of the challenge journey. Your challenge was getting sober. And when you accomplished after a few weeks, you're almost thinking, how much longer can I continue this path? I want to hit this next benchmark.
Mm-hmm.
And you just keep going with that challenge and you're never going to stop because you want to keep going and going and going. And I think people listening, they might have that challenge where are they trying to get? And then when they
Yeah.
accomplish it, they're like, okay, I want to do something more with it. Like, how much farther can I go with it? And it's not even just with addiction, it's a lot of things in people's personal health journey that they're on to getting better because they know that those results are going to help them in so many other areas.
Yeah. And at first it was like that slogan, one day at a time, man. It
Yeah.
was like 1 minute at a time, 1 hour at a time. I was going to 3, 4 meetings a day. I didn't know what else to do. And then I hit a year, right? And then it was like, that was a big milestone because a year is one of every holiday, a birthday. Enough terrible things happens in a year. And if you can stay sober through them, then it gives you like a real confidence that I could continue to do that, right? And it, it's like they call it, I don't know, the pink cloud. There was a pink cloud. I thought it was going to be great forever, and it wasn't. Around 2 years, I was completely miserable. I was depressed and sober. And I had a relationship had ended, not a healthy relationship. And I was heartbroken and I was confused. And it was like a dark night of the soul, right? Like I didn't know how to get out of this funk that I was in. And I was stuck. And so I started going to therapy again and I found the psychotherapist and I went in mad at the girl and I came out mad at my mom, which I think is common, right? Um, and I was just doing all this worked. Early childhood, family of origin, psychotherapy. And I wouldn't have been able to do it my first 90 days of sobriety. I wasn't ready. I wasn't there. But about 2 years in, I was ready to do that kind of inner work. And so out of that whole series of therapy sessions, it was probably 12 weeks in, and she goes, what are you going to do with your life? And I was like, well, what do you mean? And she said, what's your purpose? And so I became obsessed with this idea. What is my purpose?
Mhm.
Why am I here? What does this mean? Like, who am I as a sober man, right? And I quit my job. I was a realtor, and I told my boss, I don't like doing this. And he said, don't do it. He was a recovery guy too. So he said, don't do it. Do what makes you happy, right? And so I got it into my head that I had too much stuff. And so I gave away all my stuff. And I had this big house in the mountains that was not my dream house. I was living a life, but it wasn't anything that really like filled me up, right? And so I sold the house. I moved to a small condo down in Denver, and I was talking to this old timer after a meeting, and I said, "I'm depressed, man. I don't want to wake up sometimes." And he said, are you meditating?" And I said, "I'm not that depressed." And I heard myself say it. Um, and so I started meditating, and I started like getting super spiritual, right? Like, and I somehow through this odd series of events ended up at a meeting, and I asked the guy, what can I do? Like, what can I do? You know, I'm searching for something. And he said, we need sober housing. And I didn't even know what it was. But I knew I was going to do it. Right. And so I was asking people about sober housing. And this guy that I went to college with had been sober like 20 years, said he lived in St. Paul. And he said, one of my best friends owns a sober living company. Come on up and, check it out. So I went to St. Paul, Minnesota for a week, and I hung around this guy and his business, and he showed me everything, and I was blown away. It was he had 12 houses, all these people getting sober, helping each other, this whole community of people, and I wanted to bring it back to Denver because they didn't have anything like this in Denver. And so I came back to Denver. I used the money that I'd had from selling that house and from selling the bar, and with my father's help, we opened up a sober house. My depression lifted. I was having so much fun that I kept opening up sober houses. So I got up to 9 houses, and I got in a fight with the city of Denver about my ability to do sober housing. So I'm in this court battle with Denver, and the same friend said, "Why don't you open up a treatment center?" And again, I didn't know how to do that. I'm not a therapist. I didn't go to school for it, but I knew I was going to do it. And so I opened up outpatient treatment to go along with my sober housing, and we just kept adding levels of care. And so, 3 years later, I have, well, it's 8 years now, but 3 years into that, I opened up residential treatment. So now I have residential treatment with all levels of outpatient care and sober housing, and I have 35 employees, all these like super smart therapists. And it was just like one step at a time, right? Like just take one step and then let the universe rearrange the way it's supposed to happen.
With what you're doing in those first few years, were you able to answer that question that that therapist told you? What is your purpose? Do you feel that you have that, you knew what you were doing and the mission behind it?
I knew when she said that I was not living my purpose. I knew that I had never really even asked that question. Uh, and so having the answer wasn't really the most important thing at that point. At that point, it was the questions. Like that was the most important part of that journey, was asking myself, what am I doing here? Who do I love? Who loves me? Like what lights me up? And the truth is, it's alcoholics and addicts. Like I love alcoholics and addicts. I think they're hilarious. I think they know something that other people may not know. Like, when you've been that close to death, and you've been like controlled by something that you don't understand and can't stop, and then you learn how to overcome it. It gives you an ability. And it's like most of these treatment centers are owned by healthcare companies, right?
Yep.
Which is fine. It's all well and good, but I walk the walk, right? Like I've been there. I'm not supposed to be alive because of the disease of addiction. And I gave 25 years of my life to the disease of addiction. And I believe that the journey now is like taking back as many days as I can from the disease of addiction and giving that to other people.
I was about to say, if someone's coming to your facility, you have that connection. And I think a lot of patients that are coming through, they're going to see that you have been in their shoes. And that is much kind of warming to them that they're at the right place. They know that they're going to get the help that they need. Where you mentioned healthcare companies are doing the facilitating of these places, and they have no idea what these people are going through except from degrees or documentation. And I think it's the connecting is so key nowadays, where I think people are connecting to people through media platforms, videos, content, because that's how we're in that kind of realm nowadays. What do you feel when you have that person you're connecting with? You hear about a story of someone's life that you changed or you helped to where they are today. What does that mean to you?
Well, clearly it obviously it makes me feel good, right? Like, but I try not to be too affected like that. I try not to let my sense of well-being be too affected by negative or positive things. Like the way that I try to stay humble is what I'm trying to say. And like I'm not a therapist, but and I value therapists highly. But the whole vision was to set it up and allow them to find their own magic the way that I had found magic, right? And it's magic. When you've been that addicted and you come out of it and you're able to look back on it, it's magic. And that's what I needed. And like I said, I believe in therapy. I believe in the degrees, and I love all of it. But there's a model of like connection, like a social model for people in recovery that only comes from like a place with a community like this, like what I have. There's like all these people and they came and they got sober and they're still there and they're hanging around, and it's amazing.
With your story, why do you feel it's the important time to share it with the public? Is it because of what you've been able to do with your facility, or it's maybe the time and the time that we're in where people are sharing because they want to connect with people that they don't have access to?
I think right now, I mean, I think like the when I was a kid on the party scene, I could do things, I could snort things and take pills, and I had a very reasonable expectation I wasn't going to overdose and die. And right now, there's a crisis. There's fentanyl, and I believe that it's the crisis of their generation. It's killing a whole generation of young people. You know what I mean? And I just think that right now is the most important time to offer hope and to have these kinds of programs run by people like me. Um, just to offer hope. Just you know what I mean?
Where do you see the future with yourself professionally? Do you see expansion, maybe another state with what you do, or do you like being just in Colorado? But what's next? Do you have another path you want to go with?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think that I don't believe I've maxed out where I am in the city of Denver. Historically, treatment centers have been, large facilities or big mansions, out in the middle of nowhere. And we kind of know now that addiction is a chronic, lifelong, fatal disease, and it's silly to think that you can cure it with 30 days of treatment. Um, I've been in recovery almost 11 years, and I know that I have to do something for my recovery every single day.
Mhm.
And so I think that our motto is recover where you live. So you can come, you can detox, you can get 30 days of treatment, and then you step down to sober living and outpatient treatment. And the more you step down in levels of care, the more freedom you get. And so as you step down in levels of care, you're going to get a part-time job, you're going to get a full-time job, you're going to go to school, you're going to be part of this sober community. And like my goal is to get people to a year, right? And so I'd like to see more facilities like that. And the problem and the reason we won't is because insurance doesn't pay for sober living. And the big money is in detox and residential treatment. And the real magic for me is in sober living. It's what happens in that year, that first year after residential treatment. So I think that the industry I'm in needs to become more transparent. It needs to be longer term. It needs to be easier to access. You shouldn't have to be wealthy to get treatment. As far as what my next move is, I'm having fun. I'm enjoying what I'm doing. I think I'm going to keep doing it. I don't believe I've maxed out. I think there's plenty more that I can do in the city of Denver.
Our listeners like to go even more in depth with our guests. When you're not working, what do you like to do for fun that maybe people don't know you like to enjoy?
Yeah. So I play guitar still. I still play music. I play, write, and record music. I've become, I have an addictive personality. Uh, and so I'm like obsessed with self-improvement. Like I work out 5, 6 days a week. I meditate every day. So I'm always doing that kind of stuff. I rarely relax. And so I guess what I usually do is I go work out. I lift weights a lot just for fun.
Do you see yourself like participating in those like obstacle courses, marathons with it, or just you like the enjoy of just working out?
It's just, I do not see myself doing that. I'm 56. And so I think my
Hey,
gauge,
number is just a number nowadays.
no, I know, but I just think my expectations are like super realistic, right? Like I love playing music. I love working out. If I was younger, I would possibly, I don't know, do compete or do some things like that. But right now, I mean, I have 2 children. I'm a single dad. And so I have my plate, like my plate's full. Well,
Going off of being a father, what do you like to do with them? What's something fun that's memorable for them, but for you as you're all living out this life?
mhm. Just, I mean, personally, I like just screwing around with them. Like, I do. We went for a walk the other day. They brought their scooters and I walked and we just went on an adventure. We just moved to a new part of Colorado here. We're in Littleton and we just went on an adventure and we found these creeks and we found these bike paths and we're gone. 2 hours just on this adventure and then I could tell they were getting hot and tired. And I said, well, why don't we go back and get ice cream? And they were revived. And we went back and got ice cream and just anything I could do to keep them away from electronics is like just gold.
Is the area you're in known for nature, like those paths and stuff?
No, I've been in like, I'm a city guy. We've been in the city for, I don't know, a decade. And I hate to say it, but Denver's it's lost its luster for me. There's like a homeless problem developing, and there's a lot of addiction and crime. And I started to feel guilty as a parent, like trying to raise my kids there. So we got out to the suburbs, which I've never really cared for. So we're in the suburbs, and it's nice. You know, it's like you said, there's nature and trails, and it's I don't know, it just feels better to me at this point.
See, I'm the same way. I grew up city, I mean more suburb city, but like finding those like hidden trails, like past, like to me, those are like the gold mines
Yeah.
because being outside, there's this path near me where you can go up this hidden walkway and you're on the top of this mountain, overseeing this whole tree line. And to me, just being up there, just enjoying is breathtaking. And I wish I could just do that every day, but I try to make it like a routine where try to go as often as I possibly can out to these parks and stuff because, like you said, electronics are taking over
They are.
everyone's lives and especially kids nowadays.
Yeah.
So I love how you mentioned that's something that you enjoy with them, and they're going to remember that for the rest of their lives.
I think so. I just like the older I get, the more present I get. And like these are the kind of I just have like more like peak emotional experiences when I'm doing that kind of stuff with them.
The final question I'll ask you for someone that's listening to this interview based on your journey and experience, What tips or advice would you give them to overcome obstacles, accomplish their goals, and rise to the challenge?
That's a good question. So, uh, like if you're in a space and you just don't feel right, or you feel like you're asleep, um, there will come a time where you're nudged, I believe, to to wake up. And like, I did not start any of this with a grand vision. I didn't even believe it was possible to get sober. I remember telling my sponsor, I don't think this is going to work. And he said, you don't need to think it's going to work. You just need to do it. And so I just believe in taking one step in the right direction and letting the universe rearrange. And I also believe that when you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, it feels different, right?
Yep.
One of my favorite expressions is let go or be dragged. And I believe that as people, we get stuck in these comfort zones and we hold on to things. I know I do. And even holding on to good things can sometimes not be a good thing, because if you're holding on to things, there's no room for other things to come into your life, right? So just for me, there's this like flow that happens when I have faith. And if I can stay in that flow and stay out of the way of my own life, like amazing things happen. But when you're in something and you're stuck, it's so hard to see that. You know what I mean? And so I just always tell people that if you're struggling, it's okay to not know how to get out of it, but it's not okay to do nothing. You have to like ask for help.
Brice, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about your rise to the challenge. You're inspiring so many people, and we are excited to see what the future looks like for you.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for having me.
Tune in next time to hear my next guest talk about their rise to the challenge. Remember to follow, subscribe on all major audio platforms. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to experience a prison video format. What path do you take to accomplish your goals? You decide.